Okay, that was that with mirroring. I can go and change my tie again because I have my third presentation. Any questions for high availability disaster recovery or mirroring? Okay. Virtualization. So you don't need to read all of this right now. I don't even know if you can read all of it from back there. If you can, you have great eyesight. But there's a website, intersystems.com, cache or ensemble, and virtualization. On there we have a statement. And the statement contains a bunch of stuff, but the most important thing here to note is we treat virtualization technology like a computer. Okay? We don't certify computers. We certify operating systems. And therefore, you will not see us have, for example, VMware ESXi listed on our list of supported platforms. However, that doesn't mean that we don't run in a virtualized environment. That doesn't mean that we don't have experience running in a virtualized environment. And therefore, this presentation is about talking a little bit about our experiences with virtualization, some of the benchmarks that we've run, some of the best practice configurations, why you might want to use virtualization, et cetera. Okay? By no means, so I'm going to use in this presentation VMware as an example. Okay, that's because that's a recent benchmark that we ran was on VMware. By no means is that me saying to you that's the only virtualization technology you should look at. Okay? It's just an example, right? Okay. So the first question is really, you have to ask yourself, well, what is virtualization? And then you get this graph, which is a very complicated graph, many colors. I like colors. But, so it doesn't really matter what this graph says. Essentially what it's saying, in a nutshell, is that you start with virtualization and you can go all the way up to cloud computing by using virtualization. So virtualization, this is the key here. Virtualization is an IT scenario that drives many trends. Okay? So it's possible for you to take advantage of virtualization in many, many different ways. And here's what Gartner thinks virtualization has as an impact. This was in August of last year, or 2 years back. Okay, so what could some of the benefits be to you? The first thing is to reduce your hardware, to consolidate it. So instead of having one server for one application, you can have one server and have many applications running on it. So you reduce the number of servers that you have, reduce your footprint. It's called consolidation, right? Then the other thing you can do is increase utilization. So instead of having one application running on one server and using the CPU 40%, 30%, you can have maybe 2 or 3 applications on the server using the CPU 70, 80% total, right? So this is increasing the server density, and you can increase the utilization. Virtualization technologies provide out-of-the-box software-based solutions for HA and DR, okay? Now, by no means am I saying this is better or worse than mirroring. It's different, okay? It's a technology that's offered by the virtualization companies. So something to keep in mind. It's an HA and DR solution that's offered by VMware, for example. It gives you the opportunity to rapidly deploy. So you can basically say, I want to launch 3 virtual servers now. And the hypervisor that you use that manages all of your computing resources figures out automatically, quickly, where it can place each of these 3 servers. It places them, launches them, spins them up, and now you have 3 servers running, right? So you can deploy very, very quickly in this sort of an environment. VMware also offers, and other vendors do, a zero downtime maintenance mode, where essentially what you can do is you can take a running virtual machine and migrate it slowly to another physical server. And it'll fully get migrated. All your users will get migrated. Your data will get, everything will get, memory will get replicated, et cetera. And then you can shut down the first server and do maintenance on it. Okay? Partition mobility is an example of that. So the question really is what does it mean to you? If you want to use virtualization, you should start with why. You should start with why should you use virtualization, right? Many common options, like I said, we're going to be talking a little bit about VMware, ESX, ESXi. By no means is this, like I said, an endorsement for a specific product. It's just something that we have some recent data on. Okay, so what we found as part of our testing was a few years back, VMware came to us and said, so some of your customers have run some tests and some benchmarks in a virtualized environment using VMware, and the performance is terrible. So fix your application. And we said, oh, thank you, but no thank you. You fix your virtualization software. So they actually went off and they spent a good 1.5 to 2 years working very closely with Intel. And they created a monster. What they created was a new version of VMware. So this is ESX 4.0 was their version. And what Intel created was the Xeon 5500. So this is the Westmere EX, Nehalem EX line. Now Intel already had the Nehalem EX, Westmere EX line planned, but they added, quite a few features to allow virtualization technology to take advantage of some of this raw computing power. So they did this, and then they came back to us with alpha boxes. Intel gave us an alpha box, pre-beta. It wouldn't even boot sometimes. And VMware came and they gave us this pre-beta software and said, put it on there and let's run some tests. And we found that the performance was very, very good. Performance in a virtualized environment, when we first ran these tests, after they made all of these fixes, was roughly around 95%, 94%, 95% of performance on bare metal, on the machine, on the physical server itself, which is really good. So what's important here is the CPU type and the virtualization software, and you have to keep in mind that you have to have both. You can't have one and have the other be an old one and expect it to work well. Okay? So, sorry. Configuration, we talked about CPU, so the Intel line for Nehalem, Westmere, or the EX series. If you're an AMD fan, then the AMD Opteron 6100 series has a lot of support for virtualization technologies. When you're configuring memory for a virtual environment, lots and lots of memory is very good. Oversubscription is very bad. Oversubscription basically allows you to create a server that has, let's say, 8 gigabytes of physical RAM, and you create 4 virtual machines, and you give each one of them 8 gigabytes of virtual memory. You've oversubscribed this entire server. You don't want to do that, because cache is, at the end of the day, cache is a database, right? You don't want a database to page. It's not good for performance at all. So basically, you just don't oversubscribe. Okay, disk. There's a couple of different options, RDM or virtualized disk. All depends on what your application performance profile is. And so VMFS is the most common, and this is actually needed for HA. But RDM might be better for performance if you're doing sequential I/O. And at the end of this, I have some links that you can look at that talk about the differences between these two types of disk configurations. And as I mentioned, there's some HA features that are offered by these virtualization technologies. So VMware offers vMotion, where you can take the system from one server and migrate it to the other server. And you need to have a good shared storage configuration, and you need adequate network bandwidth. Okay. So this is a recent benchmark that we ran. We had a monster machine, an HP DL980 with 64 cores and 1 terabyte of physical memory. So we said, okay, let's take this server and let's carve it up into some reasonably sized virtual machines. So we ended up with 8 virtual machines. Each one of them had 8 vCPUs. Each one of them had 32 gigs of RAM. And we were using VMFS, and we're running SUSE on this. And the local disk inside the machine was only used for ESXi hypervisor. And all of the guest VMs and everything else booted from the SAN. And each VMFS volume that was created for each of those 8 was 1 terabyte, had a 1 terabyte LUN and VRAID 5. So this is, again, VMFS. You manage, so VMFS is VMware's file system, VMware file system, VMFS. You manage the configuration, the RAID configuration, et cetera, using that. And what we found was, we found really, really good performance and scalability. In fact, it was almost linear. With 4 vCPUs, we were able to get roughly 2,000 users on the system. With 8 vCPUs, we were able to get 4,000 users on the system. And the performance was almost equal to bare metal. So this is very, very close, within plus minus 2 or 3%. Very close to running it directly on the server. And here are the references that I mentioned. There's several of them over there. There's one from Microsoft. There's a couple from VMware. There's one from IBM, et cetera. Okay, so I know that I've gone over by a minute or 2, I think. 3, actually. I have a timer here. Gone over by 3 minutes. Before we end, and you think about your questions, I want to see if this server is running yet. Hopefully it's running. Yay, it's running. Okay. It's okay, you can clap, that's fine. Thank you. Okay, so let's try to connect to this. Oh, what happened here? My copy paste is not working. That's not good. Okay, let's try again. Now I need a space. Okay, excellent.